Nebraska Territory, July 1871. The sun was already low when Tessa Tilden dragged the cracked wagon wheel from the mud with her bare hands, her palms bleeding, her breath ragged. Her father coughed behind her wet, hollow, dying. She could hear it in every rattle of his chest. They were alone on the open plains, their ox dead 2 days ago, their water nearly gone. She had been carrying him for 50 miles now. Not always in her arms, he was too heavy for that, but in the battered wagon she pulled herself, inch by inch, through grasslands that shimmered with heat by day and froze with emptiness by night. "Rest, Tess," her father croaked from the wagon bed, his face gray and sunken. "Please?" She didn't answer. She just wrapped the rope tighter around her shoulders and kept moving. Behind her, a horse's hooves crushed the tall grass. She froze, one hand on the wagon rail, the other around a rusted kitchen knife she had tied to her waist. The rider came into view slowly. A man, alone, hat low, rifle strapped across his back, a thin layer of trail dust on his coat. He stopped 10 paces from her and dismounted. "You need help," he said. She didn't answer. "I'm not here to rob you," he added. "Name's Hollis Finch. I saw your trail 2 days back. Thought maybe it was a lost wagon. Been following." Still, she said nothing. Then from the wagon her father rasped, "Let him come closer." Hollis stepped forward slowly. His voice was low and steady. "You pulling him all by yourself?" Tessa didn't look at him. "Yes." He crouched near the wheel, eyes scanning over the broken axle, the dry water barrel, the rope burns on her arms. "Where are you headed?" "North Platte. Army doctor. They said he's the only one might give him more time." Hollis looked at the old man, barely conscious now, lips cracked. "Then back at her. That's over 60 miles from here." "I know," she said, her voice sharp. "I can help." "No," but her knees buckled. She caught herself against the wagon, panting. "I'm not asking for anything," Hollis said. "Let me help you, that's all." She looked at him then. Really looked. His face was worn but not cruel. There was something steady in his blue eyes, something that didn't ask for trust, just waited to earn it. "I do not know you," she said. "I ain't asking you to," he said, "but I can get you both to North Platte." "Faster than this." Her father coughed hard, curling in on himself. Tessa flinched. She gave a single nod. Hollis moved fast. He unhitched his horse, tied the wagon to the saddle horn, reinforced the axle with 2 thick branches, and had everything moving within the hour. By nightfall, they had made more ground than she had in 3 days. They sat by a fire under a cottonwood tree. Her father slept restlessly in the wagon. Hollis handed her a can of beans and a strip of jerky. "I can pull my weight," she said, taking the food. "I know," he said. "I saw you do it." She stared at the fire, then spoke softly. "He took a bullet in the chest 6 months ago, never healed right. We buried my ma last spring, just us now." He didn't push for more. "You done more than most ever could." She chewed in silence. The fire crackled. "You from around here?" she asked finally. "Texas. Grew up riding fence, breaking horses. Came north after the war, been drifting since." "Why help us?" He poked the fire with a stick. "Saw a woman dragging her father across the plains. Figured if she had the strength to do that, the least I could do is ride alongside." She looked at him again, this time longer. The next day they moved faster. Hollis rode ahead, clearing brush, finding creek water, always circling back. Each night he set the fire, cooked the food, never once asking anything from her. 3 days in, her father was fading. She knew it, so did Hollis, but neither said it out loud. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, her father reached for her hand. "Tess, if I go." "You are not going," she whispered. "If I do, let that man help you, let someone help you for once." She didn't answer. That night, when she could not sleep, she found Hollis sitting by the wagon, watching the stars. "You do not know me," she said, arms crossed against the wind. "I ain't pretending I do, but you keep staying." "I will keep staying," he said. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth from his coat. "Thank you," she said, her voice small. He looked at her. "You do not have to thank me. You are not alone anymore." She blinked quick to hold back the tears. They made it to North Platte 2 days later. Her father was barely breathing. The army doctor took one look and called for bandages, morphine, hot water. Hollis waited outside with her. The sun was high, the wind dry. Hours passed. Finally, the doctor came out. "He is not fine," he said, "but he is alive. You brought him just in time." Tessa sagged against the wall, her legs giving out. Hollis caught her. She looked up at him. "He is alive." "I told you we would get here," he said. She pressed her forehead to his chest. He held her without a word, just tight and steady. And in that moment, she knew he had been quietly saving her all along. Tessa stepped out onto the porch of the Army Post Infirmary. Her dress damp, with the strange mix of relief and fear that came after too many days of not letting herself feel either. The cottonwood trees nearby rustled in the breeze, their leaves trembling with the same quiet tension she held in her chest. Hollis stood a few paces off, brushing dust from his sleeves, watching a group of enlisted men load crates onto a wagon. He didn't turn as she approached, but his posture eased like he'd known she was coming. "He's sleeping now," she said, folding her arms across herself, not for modesty but to stay upright. Hollis nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "That doctor's got steady hands. He'll do what he can." She looked down at her boots. "There's talk inside about moving us out of the infirmary come morning. They need the beds for the wounded from Fort McPherson. You got any place else to stay?" She shook her head. "I didn't think that far." "I know a place," he said after a beat. "Half-day's ride west. Belonged to a trapper I knew. He passed on last winter. Cabin's still sound. Been keeping it up some when I passed through." She hesitated. "Would it be trouble?" "No trouble," he said. "I wouldn't offer if it was." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. They left the next morning with her father bundled in blankets in the back of a borrowed buckboard, the infirmary nurse handing her a jar of laudanum with a warning not to overuse it. Hollis rode ahead again, keeping a quiet eye on the path, but she noticed now how often he looked back. The cabin sat low in a bend of the Platte, tucked among cottonwoods and chokecherry bushes. The roof was patched with pine bark, the door hung straight, and there was a stone hearth inside that still smelled faintly of cedar. Hollis helped her carry her father in, laying him on a cot near the window. Then he stepped back, giving her space to unpack the few things she'd managed to hold onto. By nightfall, she had the fire going, a pot of barley and salt pork simmering. Hollis brought in water from the creek, setting the bucket down without a word. When she sat across from him at the table, she noticed the way his hands stayed still, folded neatly, like he was holding something back. "You live here?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not most times. I keep moving, always have." "Why?" His gaze didn't shift. "Some of us ride better alone." She swallowed a spoonful of broth. "You don't seem alone now." "No," he said, quiet. "Not right now." The days grew steadier. Her father's breathing deepened, and though he still floated in and out of sense, he began to eat again. Tessa spent mornings cleaning the cabin, hanging wet linens to dry, boiling herbs the nurse had given her. Hollis repaired the fence line, cut firewood, kept the roof from sagging. One afternoon, she stood behind the cabin, scrubbing sheets in the cold creek, when she heard steps behind her. She turned, water dripping from her sleeves. Hollis held out a tin of lye soap. "Found this in the shed, might help." "Thank you," she said, taking it. "You always know what's needed before I ask." He crouched beside her, dipping his hands into the water. "I notice things." She smiled faintly. "You don't talk much." He looked at her then, that same steady gaze. "You've had enough talk. I figured showing up counted more." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She watched him work the soap into the linens, his movements careful, respectful. "Did you lose someone?" she asked. He didn't look up. "A brother, during the war. He was younger. Braver too." "I'm sorry, me too." They sat in silence after that, the creek rushing gently past them, not the kind of silence that asked for more, just the kind that made room. That night, as her father slept, she stepped outside and found Hollis sitting near the dying fire. She sat beside him, close but not touching. "I was born in Kansas," she said. "Near Salina, we had a small dairy. My father taught me how to stitch harness leather." My mother taught me how to keep bees." He nodded but didn't interrupt. "After she passed, it was just me and him. I thought I could carry it all." "You did," Hollis said. She turned to him, the firelight softening her face. "I don't know how to do this part, though." "What part?" "The part where I let someone help me without feeling like I'm failing." He reached out slowly, his hand brushing hers where it rested on her skirt. "Then don't call it help, call it what it is. Standing beside you." She didn't pull away. The stars above them were sharp and clear, the kind that only showed themselves when the land was quiet. She leaned into the warmth of his shoulder, just enough to feel the strength there. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was holding the whole world up alone. Morning light slanted through the cabin windows, casting pale bands across the wood floor. Tessa stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring a pan of cornmeal mush. The ache in her shoulders had dulled to something manageable. Her father's breathing from the cot was steady now, shallow, but even. Hollis stepped in from the porch, carrying a crate of split wood. His coat was dusted with frost, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. He set the wood by the hearth and glanced at her. "There's rabbit tracks along the fence. Might set a snare or two before the sun's high." She nodded, not looking up. "If you do, bring in some of that pine sap from the stump. I can use it to seal the kettle lid its leaking air when it boils." He gave a quiet grunt of assent, then leaned over to check the fire. After a pause, he said, "There's a wagon trail about 5 miles west, old freighter route. Saw smoke out that way last night, might be a family camped over winter." "Do you think they'll stay?" she asked. "Hard to say. Most folks don't last through January out here, not unless they've done it before." She scraped the mush into a tin bowl, set it beside her father, then crossed to the table. Hollis joined her, pulling off his gloves. She poured him half a mug of chicory brew, the last of what the nurse at the post had tucked into their satchel. He cupped the mug, warming his hands. "You ever think on staying? For good, I mean." She didn't answer right away. "I don't know what good feels like anymore." "It might feel like this," he said. She looked at him then, his face calm, his voice level. "You think a few quiet days and a roof that doesn't leak makes a life. I think it's a start." She reached for a biscuit she'd baked before dawn, broke it in half, handed him the larger piece. "You always talk this way," he chewed for a while before answering. "No. Just when it matters." Later that day, after Hollis returned with 2 snares and a bundle of pine branches, Tessa found her father awake, eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. He motioned for her to come close. "That man," he said, his voice thin but steady. "He's not just passing through." She folded a blanket tighter around his legs. "He hasn't said he's staying. He doesn't have to." She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "Do you think I should ask him?" "No," her father said, eyes on the ceiling. "I think you already have." That evening, Tessa stepped outside as Hollis was oiling the latch on the outbuilding. Snowflakes had started drifting from a low sky, soft and slow. She leaned against the doorframe. "You ever get tired of fixing things?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Only when they don't stay fixed." She crossed the yard to him. "My father said something strange today. Most men do sooner or later. He said you're not just passing through." Hollis straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "I figured I'd stay until the thaw, and after." He studied her a moment. "You asking?" "I'm wondering." He stepped closer. "You want the truth?" "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." "I was gone too long before I met you, Tessa, long enough to forget what being still felt like. Now I think maybe I was always meant to stop here." She didn't look away. "You don't know what that might mean." "I don't need to. I know what it means now." Behind them, the wind stirred the trees, and the scent of cedar smoke curled into the air. She reached out and took the edge of his coat sleeve, fingers brushing the fabric lightly. "I've never had much of anything," she said. "Not for long. You've got something now," he answered. "And if I fall apart, then I'll be there when you do." She closed the last of the space between them, resting her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her slowly, like he'd waited a long time to be sure she'd let him. "All right then," she whispered. Inside the cabin, her father slept on, the fire low but steady. Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the roof, softening the earth. And in the stillness between breaths, the beginnings of a life took root, quiet, real, and strong. A pair of geese circled low over the river that ran behind the cabin, their wings catching the early light. Tessa watched them from the doorway, her shawl clutched close, breath rising in faint clouds. The last of the snow had crusted overnight, but it would melt by midday. Winter had started to slip its grip. Inside, her father's voice carried faintly, softer now, but with more clarity than he'd had in weeks. Hollis had built a low bench beside the hearth where he sometimes sat sketching maps into the firewood with his knife, marking water crossings and game trails from memory. That morning, though, he was splitting kindling in the yard, sleeves rolled, hat low against the sun. Tessa stepped down from the porch. "I've been thinking on planting," she said. "There's a patch behind the cabin that gets light all day." He split another log clean down the middle. "You know what'll grow? Beans, maybe squash. I saw wild onion shoots near the creek." "We could start with that," he paused. "I need a hand digging," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Unless you've got some other pressing engagement." He leaned on the axe handle. "No. I reckon that's the best offer I've had all week." She turned toward the back of the cabin. "I saved some old seed from last fall. My father always kept them wrapped in beeswax cloth." They worked until the sun was overhead, the patch cleared of rocks and roots. Hollis dug low furrows while Tessa pressed seed into the earth with bare fingers. The soil was cold but rich. After a while, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. "You ever think you'd end up here?" she asked. "Not once. Do you miss Texas?" "I miss the sound of Spanish moss in the wind," he said. "Miss the way the cicadas start up when the heat sets in, but I don't miss drifting." She picked up a stone and turned it over in her palm. "I used to believe I'd never stay anywhere long, not really. Even when we were settled, I always kept a bag packed." He looked at her then. "You still keep one?" "No," she said. "Not for a while now." They returned to the cabin with dirt under their nails and the scent of turned earth clinging to their clothes. Her father had dozed off again, a book lying open on his chest. The fire crackled low in the hearth. That evening, Tessa pulled a quilt across the table and began mending a torn corner. Hollis fetched a tin of nails and began reinforcing the windowsills with narrow strips of pine. She glanced over. "You always need to be doing something with your hands. Idle hands don't sit easy," he said. She paused in her stitching. "What did you do before you started drifting?" He tapped a nail into place. "Helped run a cattle drive. Before that, I worked a line shack outside of Abilene." "Nothing permanent. Why'd you leave?" "There was a flood year," he said. "Took half the herd. Then the owner's boy caught fever. After that, there wasn't much left to stay for." She nodded, threading her needle again. "You ever think about going back?" "Not to that life." They worked in silence for a while, then she asked, "What kind of life would you stay for?" He set the hammer down carefully. "One where the fire stays warm and the door doesn't close behind me." She folded the mended quilt and smoothed it with her hand. "I want that too." He crossed the room and crouched beside her. "You already built it, Tess. I'm just learning how to belong in it." She reached out and touched the edge of his collar, rough with trailed dust and wear. "You do belong. You've been here the whole time." He stood and took her hand, steady and sure. "Then let me keep building it with you." She nodded, and her voice was barely louder than the fire's quiet hiss. "Yes." Outside, the wind shifted westward, soft through the trees. The seeds in the garden would wake soon. And in the hush of the evening, with the hearth burning low and peace settling deep into the walls, the life they were making began to take root quietly, surely, and together. By the time the river thawed, the old trail that ran west of the cabin had turned soft with ruts. The wind shifted warmer, carrying the scent of damp bark and the faint sweetness of wild sage. Tessa stood barefoot in the doorway, brushing her hair loose after the morning's wash. Her father was upright now, dressed and sitting near the fire with a deck of worn playing cards spread in front of him. He'd taken to whittling again, small things, buttons, peg dolls, a spoon curved from plum wood. Hollis came in from the yard with mud on his boots and a coil of wire slung over one shoulder. He leaned the wire against the wall, then removed his hat and set it on the peg just inside the door. "There's a trader's wagon coming up from Julesburg," he said. "Past a man on horseback who said they're hauling seed, grain, and sugar." Tessa turned toward him. "How many days out?" "3, maybe 4. I gave the rider a note, asked him to tell the trader we've got shirts to barter." "Your stitching's finer than any I've seen on the trail." She rubbed her hands dry on her apron. "I've 2 more finished since last week. If we're lucky, I'll trade them for coffee and flour." Her father looked up from his cards. "Don't forget to ask after horseshoes. That back left hoof on the mare's gone thin." "I will," Holly said, "and I'll see if they've got oilcloth. Be good to cover the roof again before the next hard rain." That night, the 3 of them sat around the table under a lantern flame. Her father dealt cards with a practiced hand, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "I recall once, when Tess was little, she tried to stitch a saddle blanket from her mother's quilting scraps. Every square a different color, looked like a patchwork rainbow." Tessa gave a quiet laugh. "I thought it would make the horses happier. They spooked at the sight of it," he said, chuckling. "Ran half a mile before I caught him." Hollis grinned, leaning back with his arms folded. "I'd have liked to see that." Her father paused, setting his cards down. "You've brought a steadiness here, Hollis. I won't pretend I expected to see another spring, much less one like this." "I'm grateful to be here," Hollis said. Tessa glanced at him, the warmth in his voice settling something deep inside her. She rose quietly and cleared the dishes, her hands moving slow, deliberate. After her father had gone to bed, Tessa lingered near the fire as Hollis moved about the room, checking the latch on the shutters. She watched him in the dim light, the way his shoulders settled when he knew the house was secure, how he always left space for her to speak first if she wanted. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what we're building here." He turned, waiting. "We've made something out of nothing," she said. "And I want to keep building." He stepped closer. "What are you saying?" "I want you to stay," she said. "Not just through summer, not just until the barn's repaired or the fence is mended. I want you here, as mine." His voice was low. "I already am." She reached for his hand, their fingers twining together. "Then let's make it proper. I want to marry you, Hollis Finch." "There's a preacher rides circuit through the valley every second Sunday," he said. "We could speak our vows then." She nodded. "That's what I want." He leaned in and kissed her gently, his hand firm at her waist. "I'll build you a life with my own hands, every day from now on." And he did. They married under a cottonwood tree, the preacher's voice steady as the river behind him. Her father stood beside her, leaning on a carved cane Hollis had made. The neighbors from up the trail brought preserves and a tin of coffee as gifts. One woman lent Tessa a blue ribbon for her hair. Hollis wore his cleanest shirt, the one she'd stitched just for that day. They kept the cabin, added a lean-to for tools, built a chicken coop near the edge of the creek. He taught her how to read weather by the shape of the clouds. She showed him how to coax tomatoes from dry soil. Her father lived another 1.5 years, long enough to see the garden bloom twice and to rock the baby boy they named Caleb in his arms. The boy grew strong, curious. He followed Hollis into the fields, carried nails in a tin bucket when they added a porch to the cabin. In the evenings, Tessa taught him letters while Hollis carved toys from scrap wood. They never had much, but they had each other, and that was more than she had ever hoped for. One summer night, years later, Tessa sat beside Hollis on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder, the air heavy with lilac and the hum of crickets. Caleb slept inside, curled under a patchwork quilt, his breathing even. She turned to Hollis. "Did you ever think your life would end up like this?" He took her hand, kissed her knuckles. "No, but I wouldn't trade a single day of it." They sat in the dark, hands clasped, hearts full, the quiet stretching out before them like the prairie sky wide, certain and full of light.